Welcome, Dr. Doug Spencer.
All right, as was just announced to you, my research area is in voting rights and election law, and I think we're going to talk a lot more about that when we get to this discussion section over here in a minute. But for my few minutes up front today, I just wanted to have a few comments about a very simple idea, and that is the relationship between political parties, political polarization, and the incentive structures of American politics. And I think there's a lesson to be learned, perhaps, from a simplified idea about how corporations work in the United States. Now, the story that I want to tell begins in 1990. A man named Harvey Gantt is running for the United States Senate in North Carolina. Harvey Gantt is an African-American man. He was the first black student to enroll at Clemson University in the 60s. He had just completed 2 terms as the first black mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, and he's running for Senate. Now, Harvey Gantt was running against the incumbent senator, Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms was a controversial figure. This is a United States senator who said that the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were 2 of the most destructive and dangerous pieces of legislation ever enacted in the history of the United States. Later, before he retired from the United States Senate, he entered an elevator in the Senate office building and saw the very first African-American female senator, Carol Moseley Brown from Illinois, standing in the elevator next to him and started singing, "I Wish I Was in the Land of Cotton," to her face. So this is a controversial figure. A high-stakes election is how it was pitched to voters. Jesse Helms was deeply unpopular with black voters. And in North Carolina, there was a political organizer by the name of Dolores Jordan. And she supported Harvey Gantt, and she was campaigning for Harvey Gantt. And she had an idea that she thought could help Harvey Gantt win the election against Jesse Helms, and that was to get her son, Michael, to publicly endorse Harvey Gantt's campaign. Now, her son, Michael Jordan, was a basketball player for the Chicago Bulls. He didn't live in North Carolina anymore. He lived in Chicago, and he declined to make a public statement in favor of Harvey Gantt. His claim is that I didn't know the man. Why was I going to make a public statement? He got a lot of grief when this became public that his mom was begging him for political endorsement, and his teammates were asking him, "Are you going to be a big politician and a big social justice warrior now?" And Michael Jordan responded to them and said, "No. Republicans buy sneakers too." Now, Michael Jordan at the time had never won a national championship. He wasn't the player that we know he is now. He wasn't the greatest of all time. He was a popular player, but he was a special new breed of athlete who was learning how to brand and endorse products at a level that had never been seen before. I have not seen this movie, but there's a movie out in theaters now called Air that shows how Michael Jordan took a small fledgling shoe company and made it a giant corporate behemoth, Nike. Now, Michael Jordan has faced some criticism in recent years from social activists. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, another NBA player who's much more politically active, said that Michael Jordan chose commerce over conscience, and he's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life. But by and large, the logic of what Michael Jordan was expressing is and should be familiar to us in terms of how to operate a successful business. And that is, don't go alienating half of your potential customers when the purpose of your organization is to maximize your appeal to the broadest number of people possible, to build brand loyalty using customer service, and an appeal towards positive values and positive emotions the way that we're used to in corporate advertising as opposed to political advertising. We see this logic among corporations even in the modern times. Hesitancy to engage in social political causes. In 2021, the state of Georgia passed Senate Bill 202. It restricted voting access in the state. And by and large, corporations remained silent. In Florida, a few years ago, the state legislature passed a bill, an anti-LGBT bill in parts. Disney remained silent about it. But there's something different about corporations in 2021 than in 1990. A recent public opinion poll from Edelman, which is a public relations firm that routinely surveys people about the role of business in politics, found that 86% of respondents expect corporate leaders to publicly engage on major societal issues. And so there's pressure against corporations to make statements and to forego this logic. And corporations were hesitant to do so, but ultimately felt obligated to do so. Coca-Cola made a statement against SB 202 in Georgia. Delta made a statement, even though Republicans fly Delta. Disney finally made a statement against the legislation in Florida. And as predicted, backlash ensued, and there was alienation of a large swath of people who might drink Coca-Cola or visit Disney. And the question is, what's changed? What's different now in 2023 than in 1990 when we see this? This is something that Professor Montoya just talked about, and that is this growing polarization. And why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. And scholars are still exploring all of the potential reasons and causes and results. But I think political parties have a big role to play in this story. Political parties have similar incentives to corporations. They should also, and they do have an incentive to appeal to the broadest number of people in society so that they can win elections. But unlike corporations, political parties, as long as they get 50% plus one of whoever happens to show up on election day, they get all the power and all the money. And so they have countervailing incentives to manipulate who shows up to vote and to exert as much effort deciding who votes as they do persuading people of their positions. They also have an incentive to mobilize their supporters only and to find ways to exclude others from voting and to ensure that their own supporters don't defect. And they've become very effective at this, preying on human psychology and helping us learn the joy that we feel when others who aren't like us suffer. Owning the libs, Trump derangement syndrome. Our whole identity is baked into the sadness that we hope others will feel. And political parties have learned that that's a winning strategy. This is democracy on the low road. It's not the ideal democracy. And this is what we see today, premised in part by a lot of things: access to data, better understanding of the electorate, better understanding of human psychology, and then rewards by voters selecting candidates who believe in those strategies. This has generally been as much top-down from parties to us as it has been from us to political parties and campaigns. We see this polarization emerge first among elites, party leaders, elected officials, and then among voters. We see the gap among elites as broader and more pronounced than among mass voters. The effects of this polarization on us are real and lead us to some interesting, maybe detrimental consequences. Here's an example. Here's an app you can put on your phone. You scan a barcode on any product in the grocery store while you're shopping, and you can instantly learn, did the company that made this can of beans support causes that I believe in or not? And if they don't, I'm going to stick it back on the shelf. The people who created this app, they think it's wonderful. Their tagline is, you can only vote once every 4 years, but with our app, you can vote every day. Here's a different app called Boycott. This is a screenshot from my phone. I took a picture of a UPC on a Diet Coke can, and the app tells me that the CEO to median worker pay ratio is 460, which is flagged as problematic. It tells me that Coca-Cola pollutes the water supplies in India and Mexico, but that they support improving legal immigration and visa programs for migrant workers. And so then I can make an educated decision about, am I drinking the right beverage? Do they support my social causes? And for some, this is seen as amazing and an ability for us to have our voice heard in politics. For me, I think this is terrible, just honestly. I think that what we're seeing is ultimately the consumer's decisions to engage in behavior like this is leading to the polarization among corporations in terms of who they serve and how they serve them. And the simple point that I want to make today, and I hope it's not too provocative, and I suspect people will disagree with me, and that is watching corporations become more political, to me, is backwards from where we need to be going as a country. I would prefer for political parties to look more like corporations in the following sense. Political parties should build brand loyalty using customer service, using positive values, It doesn't make sense for Coke to tell me that Pepsi is poisoned, but that's what happens in politics. We need parties to maximize their value to everybody and not just to their current customers. That's the diagnosis that I want to put on the table. How we get there is another interesting question. I think should be saved for a longer conversation, which we're going to have, I think, in a few minutes. But that's what I just want to put on the table as part of my comments. So thank you very much for having me today.